Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about balancing personal well-being and the planet through dietary decisions. What an interesting and timely topic. I think nowadays we are talking more and more about the topic, but I still feel like the more we talk about it, the more we learn. So today I'm excited to learn from our guest, Hannah Bres, and I would love to introduce Hannah to everyone, and then I'll ask her to also introduce herself. Hannah is a dietitian, nutritionist, and environmental scientist who grew up on a farm that edged towards self-sustainability in the southwest of Western Australia. Growing up, she quickly learned that to achieve good health, well-being, and environmental sustainability, we must work with the natural environment and not against it. What a lovely bio there, Hannah. I really love it. And I know there's so much more about your professional journey that I saw in the other parts of your bio, but I actually would love to get you to share about that with our audience. So let us know a bit more about your professional career so far, why you chose this work. It's quite niche what you're doing, and maybe a fun fact about your work that you would like to share with our audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. It's great to be here. I started my career as an environmental scientist. I left uni and decided left school and decided that that's what I was going to study. And really that came from growing up on a farm and growing up in this kind of this life where, it is just the way life is that you work with nature. And our farm at home, it had, we had all of our fruit trees and our vegetables and eggs and chooks and nuts and everything that, pretty much we ate. And then I moved to the city and I moved to Perth and studied environmental sciences, and I realised that actually most people don't eat that way, and that actually it's quite unique, really, I suppose. I then went on and started doing my PhD actually, and I did 2 years of my PhD before I decided that I was going to leave the environmental field, and a whole host of things happened, but one of which was I had a period where I got really, really ill, and I found out after about 6 months of being really sick that I developed celiac disease. And in this journey, I actually found out what a dietitian did. I'd never even heard of it before. And then I realised how much of a factor that the foods that we eat play in our overall health and well-being, and sort of started on this journey of learning about nutrition and decided that this is something that I really want to help people with and really want to support people to make dietary changes, because, when you suddenly get diagnosed with something, as lots of people would know, you have to make these changes, and it's really hard and it has an impact on your whole life. And how do we maintain well-being by doing that? So, I changed into nutrition and then went on to dietetics. So I did spend a very long time at uni. And then over the last sort of 5 years, I've really started bringing these two things together. And it started when I started having these conversations with friends and family, that it started becoming more mainstream knowledge that actually what we need to eat needs to work with the planet, and it's having this huge impact on the planet. And I was listening to my friends, most of which are at kind of the age where they're starting to think about children, and they're starting to think about, getting pregnant, and, they're trying to balance these busy lives, and they're making these massive changes to their diet for the environment, but they're not balancing those two things. And so that's really where I started kind of working into this and thinking maybe I do have something to share here that that isn't as maybe as obvious to other people as it might be to me. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Wow, that is so interesting. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that you got really ill, but it's kind of like a redirection, and that's why you're here. I think a lot of stories go like that. Like something happened. I have to change my whole belief system in my career because of that. But, thankfully, you got to where you are now. And it seems like you're really passionate about this topic. So I'm excited to learn from you today. It is a topic that I sort of struggle with personally. And I think our audience probably would relate with me because we're all learning. And, if we're not in the field, if we don't have all the specific knowledge, it's kind of like we're just shooting in the dark. And sometimes we do our research, i.e. Google, for things when we need it. But it's very different from learning from an expert. So today we're going to do that with you. And hopefully our audience will take away a lot of things that they can use in their daily lives. Before we get there, let's learn about you a bit more first. We have a part we call it Have You Met Hannah? And we're just going to get some recommendations or favorite things from you to get to know you better. My first favorite thing to always ask my guest is, what is your favorite book?
Yeah, so my favorite book is actually a relatively new book. It's only a couple of years old and it's called Animals Make Us Human. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No.
It is the most beautiful book. It's not a book that you sit down and you read cover to cover. It's one of those books that it lives in my bookshelf at home and, I just pick it out and have a flick through like every couple of days. But it was, the idea came from the 2019-2020 bushfires. And all it is it's a compilation of little stories and anecdotes of people around Australia. So they might be researchers that work in the area, or they might be writers or artists, or, these people that have all got these really unique ways of looking at nature, but they've all connected with it somehow. And they're just these beautiful stories with these beautiful images that go with it about how beautiful the Australian nature is and how fortunate we are to be here. And what I love about it, first thing I love about it is every book that's sold, all the money goes to conservation, to two big conservation organisations in Australia. So just by buying a copy, you're automatically doing a good thing for nature. But the second thing I love about it is that it reminds us how beautiful the Australian nature is and how lucky we are to be here, but also how fragile it is and that it's not just a given. And when we connect with something on an emotional level, we're much more likely to protect that. So just by reading it, you are having that connection, that daily connection. And then it certainly gives me that little bit of energy that I need to keep going when I'm living my busy kind of, crazy life, trying to juggle everything.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I'll put that on my reading list. Thank you for sharing. Which movie have you enjoyed recently?
Yeah. So I'm a big documentary fan. My idea of a great Sunday afternoon is to sit down and watch a travel and cooking show. So one that I've been watching recently actually is the documentary series Live to 100 that's about the blue zones. I don't know if you've seen it. It's really great. And full disclosure, I have not fact-checked every single thing in there. But what they do is they follow Dan Buettner around to the 5 different blue zones around the world, and he shows you what their lives are like. And the blue zones are these specific places where more people live to 100 than anywhere else. And they live to 100 relatively healthily. So, that's the goal, right? To have as many healthy years as possible. And so he takes us around the world on this journey. And by looking at how they all live, you start to see what common factors there are. And so, for me, obviously, there's the dietary factors that I'm obviously interested in, and I have a look at those. And lots of those are mostly plant-based, mostly whole foods, eating in a way that really is to eat with what the nature provides us. There's some different forms of exercise. Most of them are incidental exercise, so gardening or walking or kind of just making movement a part of our day. And there's a few other things that, that he does talk about in there. But one of the things that he doesn't talk about and that I would be really interested to find more about, so if he ever listens to this podcast, this would be great to include, that all of these different places, they're all over the world. They're in different climatic regions. They're in different places. They have different ways of life, but they're all connected to that area. And they all have local seasonal foods. They all spend time in their gardens. They're connected to it, and they're living in a way that's supported by their immediate environment. And I think that that's a really interesting component of it.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think I've seen that show, like I've seen the name and I've seen an ad about it, but I just never got around to watching it. But that sounds fascinating. I'll have to watch it now.
Yeah, do that.
Cool. Now, a lot of our guests actually don't listen to podcasts. I wonder if you do. And if so, what is your favorite one?
I actually listen to a lot of podcasts.
That's good.
I listen to a lot, and I listen to a really broad range of things. I think my favorite podcast would have to be the Thinking Nutrition podcast by Dr. Tim Crow. Do you know it?
I have not heard about it before. No.
Okay. So Dr. Tim Crow he's Melbourne-based. He's an advanced accredited practicing dietitian. Full disclosure, he was one of my lecturers when I studied my dietetics at Deakin in Melbourne. So I do get a bit of, nostalgia when I listen to it. But he talks about all these different aspects of nutrition and different topics, and they're really, really interesting. So his most recent one was on whether there's any evidence behind using cranberries to treat UTIs. He debunks a lot of myths, and they're all really accessible and entertaining. And, he's got this great way of translating the science into something that's fun and you can listen to while you're just driving around. So that would have to be my favorite one.
Ooh, nice. And a podcast by a Melburnian, I love hearing that. We don't actually hear a lot of that on this show. So thank you for sharing. Now, I wonder if you have a role model, and if so, who would that person be?
Well, I've got a number of people that have inspired me over my life. My biggest one would have to be Jane Goodall for the work that she's done she's dedicated her life to conservation and to finding out about chimpanzees in Africa. And now her institute continues on, and it continues on doing these things. But what really inspires me more than just her work and more than just being, incredible in that way and finding out so much about other primates is that as a woman in science, she really is one of the leaders. When she went to Africa, women just weren't doing that. Her mum went with her in the 50s and 60s, and she has continued on this life's work. And to be a real leader in science, she spreads this message of hope and inspiration and what an individual can do to conserve nature. And that's really what we need when it comes to climate change. We need hope. We need individuals taking this on and saying, well, what can I change? What can I do? What is in my power? And so that message that she has, I think, is translatable to so many areas of science and so many issues in today's world.
Beautiful. Well, very on brand. I have to say, overall, your answers so far are very on brand with your professional work. And yeah, I think it just shows that you're really passionate about what you do. Now, last question. I wouldn't be surprised if it's also on brand. What is a course you've completed that really inspired you?
I don't have one course. I'm one of those people. I always have something going on. So at the moment, I'm doing a diploma in leadership at the moment, and my husband's Norwegian, so I'm also taking Norwegian classes. So I think what creates our point of view and our unique sense of how we see things is by what we've learned and what we've experienced So if anything, it would be, combining all of the courses and all of the different things that I've done. And I'd recommend for anyone to just continue learning. We're so fortunate to be able to. So continue learning, make sure it's evidence-based, or make sure it is actually credible and legitimate learning, so that you're not getting taken off down some weird pathway. But, that's what creates our unique voice. So continue doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that. And through the last question, we learned a few new things about you. So thank you for sharing that. And definitely, we've got to know you heaps better. The bio just speaks very little about who you are. And I just love learning about you and all these new recommendations. So we'll definitely put them on my list. Now, let's talk about today's topic. It is, I think to me, it's like a scary topic in the sense that I don't know much about it. And I would love to learn about it. And, who better to learn from than you, who is so experienced in this area. But since we're talking about well-being, let's start with well-being. I would love to hear your personal definition of well-being before we start.
Well-being is a huge topic. There's so many things that impact our overall well-being. As a dietitian, I'm obviously going to say nutrition is a huge part of it, and what we eat is a huge part. There's also, our physical well-being, and we know that what we eat influences both our physical and our mental well-being. We know that it's key to having a diverse microbiome, which is, key to our overall health and well-being. An area that I'm really interested in is also our social connectedness and how socially connected we are. And there's lots of things coming out about that now. I've been reading quite a bit about that in terms of the impact of technology. I think also that stems then to our connection to the world around us. Like I said before, my husband's Norwegian. Before kids and, 9-to-5 work, I lived over in Norway for a winter, and I had gone from, Western Australia. Winters are so mild here, 18 degrees and sunny most days. So you're still outside a lot of the time in winter. And I went and spent a winter over there, and we've got 4 to 5 hours of daylight a day. We've got days and days of heavy snowfall, and it's freezing cold sometimes. And for me, I was just so cold. I couldn't go outside, and I really lost that connection and that ability to just be outside and be kind of in nature. And so I was still eating really nutritious food. I was still sleeping really well. I was still moving my body every day, but that really did impact my overall state of well-being. So for me, I think there's lots of different aspects to it, but that connection to the world around us really is a big one.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you. And I think it's a different definition compared to usual. Like, obviously, I've heard quite a few definitions on the show about well-being. And yes, people do cover, physical well-being, mental well-being, and so on. But I guess that connection we have with our body, through, what we eat and what we put into our bodies, and also the environment around us. I guess sometimes we don't really pay attention, especially for people that live in the concrete jungle. Like I live in, the CBD of Melbourne, and sometimes I just forget about it. And when I get the opportunity to go to the outback, I think that's when it's really like, oh, you know what, this is so great. Like I didn't think about any of these things. Like I'm learning so much about nature. And I do think that one of the things, I think you briefly mentioned this before, in when you talked about the book that you like, the bushfire. That's when when that happened, I really was affected by what is going on in the world, because obviously it's not unclear to us that, the environment is suffering. But I think that that time it was so clear, like everyone could actually see it and feel it. And that really impacted our well-being.
Yes, absolutely. And watching how it changes and how quickly it changes.
Yeah.
I think it really has impacted a lot of people, the bushfires. And I think we think about the immediate thing of people's houses and people's safety and those sorts of things. But then, the famous image of the koala getting a drink of water, you really do realize how much it impacts people's overall well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think today, because we're talking about not just our own well-being, but also, we were talking about the planet, it's a bigger topic. And I think sometimes it's really important to put things into perspective, because on the show, obviously, we talk a lot about personal and individual well-being, which is important. That's what we're here to learn, because we're humans. But we cannot really take that out of context, because we are all, impacting the planet that we're living on. So I think from my perspective, obviously, there might be a few misconceptions here and there. When people think about well-being, they might discount the planet altogether, because they're kind of like, oh, well-being is me, I'm well and good, physically, mentally, emotionally, which is, not far from the truth. But I do think that a misconception there is perhaps we don't, account for the impact that we also make on the planet, and, the planet's well-being affect our well-being. And there's so much happening in the world right now. I don't think I need to go into detail for people to really understand what I'm trying to get at. But I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that perhaps we do have. And I'm saying this to remind myself, because sometimes I don't think about it as much as I should. So I wonder, from your perspective, what else do you think people tend to get wrong when it comes to well-being?
Yeah. So, well, being in the nutrition field, there is a lot. There's a lot of things out there. It's a really noisy space. When you think about mainstream media, you think about, social media, these sorts of things. There's a lot of people sharing their own viewpoints, and they're not necessarily incorrect, although sometimes they are, but they're also not necessarily correct for everyone. So think about, over the years, we've had times of low-fat diets and the Atkins diets where, fat was absolutely demonized. Everything needed to be low-fat. And then we moved into this era of carbohydrates are bad, sugar's bad. We all need to be eating keto or, low carbohydrate. And generally what happens is, a claim like that is made and people throw heaps of money into researching it, and then the research doesn't really show anything, and then the next thing starts. And what ends up happening is people are kind of following these whole heap of different food rules and these different things and becoming really confused about, well, hang on a minute, I thought fat was the bad thing, and now you're telling me that carbohydrates are the bad thing, and now I don't know what I'm meant to be eating. And all the while, we're becoming more and more disconnected with what our bodies are telling us. So, having worked with literally thousands of people and hearing that thousands of people's, the different way people eat from all over the world, from all different backgrounds, I think the biggest misconception is that we all need to eat the same. There's a few founding things, like absolutely there's some baseline premises for nutrition, but really what we need to be doing is listening to what our body needs. So is snacking good? Is snacking bad? It's different for different people. It depends how that's happening for you. One of the big things that I think is a misconception is that food rules are the way to go. So anything that says you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, yes, no, black and white, making you feel guilty about what you're eating or making you feel bad about how you're eating, that is, that's not good for us either, because that's impacting us emotionally. So, we're eating in a way that works for our life, it works for our body, it works for what's going on for us that day or at that time, and being flexible with it. So, yeah, it's a really grey area, and I think that's what makes it really difficult for people, because people like really clear lines. This is what I should be doing, but what's right for one person is not right for the next. And we need to kind of sit there and think about what feels good for us and try and connect back with ourselves, which can be really, really difficult for people if they're really confused.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's true, because, it's not a one size fit all kind of thing. And, another big thing that actually, like I had a conversation with my friend about this, is also your background, your cultural background. You cannot just be saying, to a friend, hey, you should be eating this and that, without factoring in, how their childhood went. Because to me, for example, like I used to have this conversation. Actually, it used to be on my personal podcast, with a friend who is, practicing veganism, and we talk about the fact that, like the plant-based diet is really important for the planet and the health of, the health and well-being of the planet. But to me, it's kind of like something that I try to do more of, rather than say like, hey, I'm a vegan. I'm not going to say that. Why? Because my cultural background, the way that I was brought up and how I was brought up just told me that this comfort food is, what I need from time to time to remember my grandma by, because, that reminds me of her, and I'm not going to give that up. I know that, I should cut down on it, and I will, but it doesn't mean that I have to give it up altogether for the label,
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So true. And the thought that everybody needs to be eating the same way, and that we should be feeling guilty for how we eat, because, like you say, the way what we grew up with eating forms a huge part of our of our traditions, what we eat on Christmas, what we eat with our family. It's what brings us together with people, and having this guilt around it is, it's so sad to see that that's where food is going. And, like when we think about eating for the planet, for example, yep, absolutely, there's some things that we can all be doing. But if we all start making some small changes that fit in with our lives, we're more likely to maintain them long term. And then we can build on them if we want to, if we can. And then all together, we will actually have a huge impact, rather than having a couple of people doing massive changes, which I support and salute if that's, what people want to do. But for everybody else, there are still things that they can do while still having all those things that they love. They don't have to give everything up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the part of education that we all need, right? Because we're all learning what to do, how we can all be better. And I think that's the most important thing. And I'm sure that's why our audience are tuning into this episode to learn, not to, make any judgment or kind of like, okay, I have to change like right now today and just make drastic changes. So for them to make small changes that matter. And this is also like something I'm curious about. Obviously, as you say, there are little things we can do to help, when it comes to the health of the planet. So before we go into the what, let's talk about the how. So how can this, how can these little changes, like how can the way we eat per se, affect the health of our planet?
Yeah. So 30%, 30 to 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions at the moment globally come from our food, somewhere around our food. So that could be anything from what's produced on the farm all the way through to what we throw out when we throw it in the bin. Food waste is a huge contributor of greenhouse gases. So it also is what happens after our kitchen tables. It's not just that though. Our food systems impact every aspect of our environment, and the World Wildlife Fund counts it as our food system as the biggest threat to nature. And I think that it's not, that message doesn't get out there to people. It's not a well-known thing. I think people think greenhouse gases, but they don't think that habitat loss, and that we're still clearing land around the world to make way for more paddocks. We're still, we're depleting fish stocks where our fertilizers are running off into water streams and causing algal blooms. And there's all of these things that impact it, and it's not just the greenhouse gases. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is that there's always going to be a trade-off. So every time we eat, we're going to have an impact on the environment, and we have to, because we're consuming something that has grown or been made, or so thinking about that, for an example, I'm just trying to think of an example like our plant-based milks. Most people are aware that we're swapped to a plant-based milk and that's going to be better for the environment. But then we also know that some of our plant-based milks have lower greenhouse gases, while some of them have, more water usage or something like that. So we're trying to balance those things as well. And that very much comes down to what people value, what people see value in, and where people choose to go with that line. And I don't think anybody has the right to tell somebody else what to value. That's our own personal thing. But it's just understanding that there are going to be trade-offs. And then we have other things like, the packets that our long life plant-based milks come in, they're not getting recycled at the moment. So they are, for our low waste people who are also doing amazing things for the environment, they're not happy with that. Our people that are thinking about the nutrition side of it are thinking, well, we need to make sure it's fortified with calcium. Otherwise, there's just so many things that go into every single choice. And there's so many ways it impacts the natural world. And so knowing what to do or knowing which choice is best, and I say that with, inverted commas, is really, really hard. And I think that's where we come back to the message of it's not about whether you choose this plant-based milk over that plant-based milk. It's about what you eat day to day, month to month, week to week, and how you gradually make small changes that over time build on things. So if you drink cow's milk, you're not automatically not doing anything for the planet. It's not this kind of black and white food rule space. It's very much sort of, you might like cow's milk, that might meet your needs, but you might do all these other things that reduce the environmental impact of your diet, and that's fine. Or you might have plant-based milk, but you might still find it hard to reduce your food waste, and that's still something you're working on, and that's also fine.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much to learn here, right? The more you talk about it, the more I think it's something that we have to really break down and kind of have a list of categories that we need to look out for. And it's going to be a process because I don't think anyone sort of started thinking about, like their well-being and the well-being of the planet, and then they kind of go, you know what, like I'm going to be on a program, that's going to be hard. So it's probably like the little choices we can make daily and then weekly and then monthly, like little things add up. And like you were saying, it's so many things that there's just so many things out there that we don't necessarily think about. And I love the example you gave of the milk, because like actually at our office we had a conversation about different kinds of plant-based milk a while ago, and when you were talking about that, it just kind of came back to me. And yeah, like it's true, like a lot of people are kind of like, oh, like I do plant-based milk and I'm good. And are you really, there needs to be a bit more education there, right? It's not just about, oh yeah, like I do this and that is good.
Exactly. That is exactly right. I remember when I still lived in Melbourne and I was looking at this plant-based cheese that was in the supermarket, and I was reading the back of the packet and I was thinking, well, plant-based, that's great. I'm avoiding the dairy industry. We know generally that the dairy industry has higher greenhouse gas emissions. But then I look at this plant-based milk, plant-based cheese, and the first thing I look at was, well, there's no health benefits to eating it. So from a nutrition point of view, it's not equal. There was no calcium, there was no protein, there weren't these things in there that, were important to me to meet my nutritional needs. And then I also looked at the rest of the packet, and it was made out of bamboo fiber that was grown in China. The plant-based cheese was made in Scotland, and then it was brought to Australia, and I was looking at it in Melbourne, and it was individually wrapped in this tiny little packet. And I was thinking, well, when we actually start thinking about this holistically and we start thinking about this, cheese has been around the world twice just about. It's, when from the minute it started to when I'm holding it in my hand, looking at the whole, we call it a life cycle analysis. So the impact of the whole food system, it's not as simple as dairy is bad. There's so much more that goes into it, and we don't have the data in Australia. So it's about making these kind of informed choices and then looking at changing that as we get more data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really insightful. We can have a mental checklist of, when we make these choices, about, not just, oh yeah, it's plant-based, so it's good, but also, hey, like, where does it come from? How was it made? Those things are also equally as important. And then you mentioned the nutrition aspect. And I'm now really curious because obviously we just talked about the health of the planet. But nutrition is a very big thing for our personal well-being, as you mentioned earlier, right? It's one of the biggest anchors for yourself as a nutritionist when you talk about individual well-being. So for our audience benefit, what would that look like in terms of, personal well-being, and how does a diet that is a bit more on the sustainable side can actually impact our individual well-being?
Yeah. So, in the scientific literature, they call it a healthy and sustainable diet. And, I don't love that term because I think that there's so many connotations to the word diet. But, to say a healthy and sustainable dietary pattern sounds a bit long and cumbersome. But really, if I like to think of it in, as a Venn diagram with two circles, and you can eat for your health, you can eat for the planet, and they may overlap. There is a segment where they do overlap, but they don't necessarily overlap. And making some choices where you're making trade-offs for each of them and knowing where those trade-offs can happen is really the key to kind of eating that way. I mean, one of the things that I suppose most people can do, or I know most people can do, is they can eat more plant-based foods. We know that only about 5% of Australians are eating enough fruit and vegetables as per our national recommendations. So, that's one thing that most of us can do. If we're eating more plant-based foods, that's pretty simple. And that could look like just simply having more. It could look like having one plant-based meal a week. It could look like having, swapping out some things. So if you're going to have mince, swapping it out with half lentils or something like that. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of just slowly include more plants without having to follow a plant-based diet and still having a big impact.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you just made there, because a lot of people might go, I'm a little confused. Like, what do I do now? Like, where do I start? There's so much to do. So yeah, I think that's a really good example of what people can try. So what are some of the other examples that, would fall into that category of the overlapping part in that Venn diagram?
In the middle.
Yeah.
So another thing people can do is generally try and eat less processed foods. So, think about a muesli bar. You might be reading the back of your muesli bar packet and, say it's made in Turkey, but it's made from imported ingredients, which means that all the nuts and seeds and everything have been flown from all over the world to that factory in Turkey. It then gets made into a muesli bar in this factory and wrapped in individual packaging and then popped into a box, and then it's put on the back of a ship or onto an aeroplane and transported to Australia for us, transported wherever you're buying it from. So thinking about that whole process and thinking about what journey your food's been on before you're having it, you can start to see where else the environmental impacts are. So, when we're thinking about processed foods, it comes into what happens while it's being made. So unless it's done with green energy or renewable energy in the factory, that's going to be using environmental, it's going to be producing greenhouse gases. And thinking about the packaging, what's going into it. We know that single-use plastic is not good for our health and it is not good for the planet. So trying to avoid as much packaging as possible. Noting that, some foods are going to be wrapped in plastic and, we're not all going to be going down a sort of a zero waste path. So that's just the way it is. And then thinking about where your food is coming from and how far it's come is a huge aspect. And I think people think about that in terms of our fruits and vegetables, but they're not necessarily thinking about that in terms of our common supermarket foods. So thinking about, most of us have to eat things that are from the shelves, that come in packets, that have had some level of processing, but thinking about where they have come from is a massive part.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. And when we started talking about this, and when you mentioned like, oh, like this muesli bar, how it was made, and then I started to think about the fact that I sometimes just don't pay attention to these little things because there are so many choices at the supermarket, and then sometimes you're just overwhelmed, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna pick like whichever one that looks good, decent price, looks nice, seems delicious, and then I'm gonna go with that one.
Exactly. Or this one's on special, or I'm in a
Yeah.
rush and the kids are asking me for this one, so I'm just going to get it.
Yeah, exactly. You just go with the easier choices, and just do what's good for the budget as well, like you were saying. It's so hard to factor all these things in. So I think that's one of the challenges when people start to embrace this healthy and sustainable, way of consuming, I would say, food or ingredients in general. But what are some of the other challenges that you think or you have observed that people, tend to get into? And also, how can they overcome them when they embark on this journey? Because it's probably a new thing for a lot of people.
I think, so I'm just going to jump to the end of the question. To overcome it, just starting small, any change, like I can't say it enough, any change has an impact. So if it's your muesli bars that you change, that's great. Like just being mindful of it when you can is amazing, because if we have everybody doing that and setting some intention around this, we will make an impact. And when we look at changing our food, we can think about, well, food industry are going to respond. If we're all making changes because something is more sustainable, then they're going to respond with making more products that are more sustainable. So that's just one thing. In terms of the challenges, I think it's the common things that come with making any dietary change is time and money are big things. Having a perception that it is hard, and it doesn't have to be hard, but you do have to get that information somewhere, and that bit is hard. Getting some information that is not really biased or really kind of caught up in somebody's personal journey as opposed to what the science tells us. I know that there are two aspects of it, but we do need to be looking at the science. We can't just look at one person's journey that might not necessarily be all evidence-based, if that makes sense. So that can be a real challenge. The time factor, we know people are relying on convenience foods because we're busy. So that's another factor, and that comes down to being organised, but that is hard. And then the money side of things, there's also a bit of a misconception that eating a sustainable diet has to be expensive. And, shopping for our heirloom vegetables at our local farmers market is wonderful. And I would do that all the time if I could. But, we can't. I personally can't. I have to just try and do that when I can and eat other, not like, from Woolworths and Coles other times as well, or, But one thing that you can do for a lot of people, I think, a lot of people are struggling from a budget point of view at the moment. One thing that you can do is reduce our food waste, and that will have a huge impact, even if that's the only thing people work on. So the last figures that I read that came out from earlier this year show that about $3,000 per household gets wasted a year on food that we just chuck out. And so if we can try and cut that down, then we're going to save money and we're going to have a huge impact on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point because, I've noticed how much food we chuck at home sometimes because, like we meal prep and then we just get sick of it and we don't finish it. And then, it's just something to think about even before meal planning, like, oh, that's a really big part of knowing yourself, right? Hey, I don't like to eat the same thing over the course of 3 days. Maybe I need to meal prep in smaller amounts and then cook more often because that works for me. So I don't chuck food, you know?
That is exactly it. Or like, some people just don't like eating leftovers, or they don't like eating leftovers for lunch. It's fine. Everybody's different, but eat in a way that you like know yourself and know what works for you and work with that, rather than saying, I have to eat these leftovers, you
Mm,
know? So
yeah, so true. Yeah, I really love that. And I think it is the small steps that we can all take. It doesn't sound as complicated as the topic make it to be, like it's not like, oh, you have to make big changes to protect, your planet and your personal well-being. It's actually like a compilation of little things that we can all do. And in the process of trying all these new things, we can slowly learn as well. Because what I find is, and I think this is something that everyone can relate to, it is very intimidating because there's so much information out there. There are so many sources. And then, it is a, excuse me, a big topic when, you talk to your friends who are a little bit more educated, they tend to get judgy and then you're kind of scared. You don't want to talk about it at all. So I think another thing also is, when we talk about such topics, just keep an open mind and, be kind because we are all learning.
yes, that's exactly right. Come from a place of no judgment.
Mm.
Everybody's doing the best they can, and they're trying to juggle these really busy, chaotic lives that we all live, and everybody's trying to do the best they can. And we can't all do everything. So let's focus on the things that we are doing and look at what we are doing without any judgment, but just with an open mind.
Yeah,
Maybe I might like it. Maybe it might work for me. Maybe it
so true.
doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And, that's quite a bit of theory that we've covered. I think today I've definitely picked up a few new things from you. But we have a part where we're going to get more practical even. So, I think you actually have given us quite a few tips there, when talking about all these dietary choices that can help both our personal well-being and the planet's well-being. But to be even more practical, especially for the audience that are kind of like, I still don't know what to do. I'm still a little stuck. I'm still a little scared. What is a practice that you would recommend? Maybe this is something that you did, a long time ago when you first started embarking on this journey to actually manage your dietary decisions in a way that would actually benefit both your personal well-being and the well-being of the planet.
Yeah. The first thing I think anybody to do, the number one step is to start planning meals. So it sounds so basic, but it really is kind of your one opportunity to step out on the balcony and look at what you're eating and look at it, you know, working with people, thousands of people. I say, what did you have for dinner last night? And I can't remember. Well, what did you have 2 nights ago? I can't remember. Think about 5 nights ago. You certainly can't remember. So how can we make mindful changes and slowly build on them if we're just racing around and we can't actually even remember what we ate yesterday? So how can we actually look at that with just curiosity and go, oh, maybe I could have changed that, or that didn't feel good for my body, or I had that for lunch and I really didn't feel great in the afternoon. And so kind of taking that step back. And I think that is really the number one thing. And from there, then you can use that as a bit of a roadmap to then go, well, actually, on Thursday nights, we never know how many people are going to be home. I always end up cooking and it never gets eaten. So we're going to plan to have something else on Thursday night that fits with that. Or Wednesday nights, all the kids are at sports and we never have time. So we stop on the way home and get takeaway. So we're going to plan for that now. Or, whatever it is, however you look at it, but by kind of setting out what you're going to eat for the week, you really get to have a bit of a roadmap there. And that would be my number one starting place.
I love that. Yeah, my whole life just flashed before my eyes when you said that, because I'm like, I have not been adulting properly because I do not do meal plan. I did that. No, to be fair, I did that for a while and it just didn't work out because, it was so hard cooking for one. And I always waste food and I always like struggle with it. And then there was this period of time where I just ate out because I just could not. Because it's just easier to buy portion for one, rather than cook. And then I get bored easily. So I knew myself and I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. Living by myself back in the day, it was so hard. And then now having a housemate is kind of different because you can meal plan together and then you ask each other questions like, oh, what do you want to eat today or tomorrow? And my housemate is amazing at that. So she kind of does the planning for me and I don't have to think too much. And sometimes that decision paralysis is real. Like you're just kind of like, I'm so overwhelmed with all the choices that I have. What do I do? So yeah, I think it's a really good thing that we can all try. And, I'll try to be more mindful of that the next time I go grocery shopping. Because a lot of the time I go grocery shopping like this. All right, I am out of food. Let's go. I make a list and then I walk into Woolies and then I'm like, oh, that looks nice. I can make this. And then the list is out the window.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Or it's like suddenly you're in the Tim Tam aisle and then you walk out, that's all you've got.
Yeah. I was supposed to get greens. Why did I end up with chocolates? So it happens. It happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely something that that I know a lot of people struggle with, and we have so much planning to do in life in general. So when it comes to food and meal prep and meal plan, it's kind of like it might feel like this added pressure, but I think what I did learn from you today is anything that requires change, you should kind of start small. So maybe we can start small by planning just for the weekend first and then planning for the week.
Exactly. So I plan for 4 nights a week and then I leave Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just, whatever comes. The way we do it, I've got 2 kids, so we all choose a meal. And to be fair, my youngest kid is only 2, so her older sister gets to choose 2 meals, really. But then you get buy-in from them. So everybody knows we're having, mummy's meal tonight, what she chose, and then people don't get to complain. And that is same on their days. So you kind of get that buy-in from everyone and it certainly helps with my mental load. I don't have to come up with everybody's with food ideas every single day or negotiate on my night because I want to eat what I want to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good one. Yeah, I like that. For families, parents who are listening to this can certainly learn from you there, and just let everyone buy in and choose their own thing, and then you have a few options there. And actually, more brains are better because sometimes I'm just like, I don't even know what I want. Like sometimes that's how I do meal plan. I just sit down and I'm like, okay, so we're planning for meals, but what do I want? I don't know.
Yes. When I used to live on my own, I had a period of living on my own for about a year. And it was exactly the same. By the time I had decided what I wanted, I was so over it. I didn't want to eat it anymore because it's taken so long. You just want somebody there to say, no, not that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so much easier for someone to kind of give you like a list. Yes. Like, this is what you're eating. Stick to it. And I'll be like, I'm so thankful. Like I would love that because I just cannot decide.
Well, the great thing about meal planning though is that it does actually save you time, right?
And eventually it adds up.
Yeah. So it does do it. It's just about getting started and breaking that cycle of just going to the shops on the way home from work.
Yeah. And you make bad decisions when you're hungry as well, if you don't have a list. Yes. So yeah, I think that we can all relate. Well, thank you. This has been so fun. Didn't think it could be this fun. But we're at the end of the podcast now. So we have open mic for you before we let you go. I would love to get you to share, something that you are passionate about that you would like the audience to know. I know it was hard for you to decide earlier, so I'm curious what you're going to talk about.
I suppose I'll just talk about my business that I've started. So Green Nutrition Australia is a corporate nutrition company where I provide workshops and presentations and cooking demonstrations in a really kind of fun and positive way with a really practical focus. So these can be either nutrition focused with an undertone of sustainability, or they can be a sustainable eating focus with an undertone of nutrition, whatever suits everybody's needs. But yeah, I work with people all over Australia, both virtually and in person. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you. And speaking of which, if people would like to reach out to you for those workshops and presentations, where should they go?
They can find me on Instagram and greennutrition_Aus, AUS, or on my website, which is greennutritionaus.com.au.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thanks again for being here. I had such a great time. And honestly, I was kind of like, can we just keep going? This is fun. But then I'm like, we have to close it, Lu. Stop.
We can do a part.
Yeah, we can do a part 2. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.